Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's a bit more, well, dry than usual, aridity. Specifically, we're going through this 2024 UN report about where aridity is increasing, what that means for the planet, and what we can do about it. The report itself is from the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, and it's pretty dense, but don't worry, we'll make sure this deep dive is anything but dry.
That's right. This isn't just about deserts. It's about things that affect you, the foods you eat, the air you breathe, even the price of that new phone you've been wanting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But first, let's get the basics straight. When we talk about aridity, what exactly are we talking about? Is it just a fancy way of saying drought?
Not quite. A drought is like a temporary dry spell. Imagine your garden wilting during a heat wave.
Mm.
Aridity, on the other hand, is a long-term dryness of a region. Think of it like the overall climate pattern, rather than a short-term weather event.
So aridity is more like the underlying condition, and drought is a symptom of that condition.
A great analogy. And to measure aridity, scientists use something called the aridity index. Basically, this index tells us how much water a region is getting versus how much is evaporating.
So a high aridity index score would mean a place is really dry.
Exactly. And here's the thing that makes this relevant to you. The higher the aridity index, the more likely a region is to face things like desertification, sand and dust storms, and even water scarcity.
Wait, hold on. Water scarcity, doesn't that also mean food scarcity? After all, you need water to grow crops.
You're absolutely right. Aridity has a huge impact on agriculture. The UN report estimates that aridity is already the main reason behind the degradation of about 40% of all the farmable land globally.
40%, that's huge GE. I mean, if that much farmland is degrading, it's got to affect food prices, right? No wonder groceries are getting so expensive.
We're connecting the dots perfectly. As that land degrades, it produces less food,
Yeah.
which drives up prices.
Mm.
And it's not just about price, it's also about availability. Some foods may become harder to find in the future because of aridity.
Okay, that's starting to feel a little unsettling, but how widespread is this problem, really? Are we just talking about a few deserts getting bigger, or is this something more serious?
It's definitely more serious than that. Over the past 30 years, the number of people living in drylands has already doubled to 2.3 billion. And if current trends continue, that number could reach a staggering 5 billion by the end of the century.
5 billion people. That's mind-blowing. And I bet it's not just happening in places we traditionally think of as dry.
You're right. We're seeing rapid expansion of drylands in parts of the U.S., Mexico, even Europe. And it's happening in Africa, Asia, and Australia as well. It's truly a global phenomenon.
All right, so we've got a clearer picture of what aridity is and how widespread it's becoming. But this report also talks about the impacts of aridity, and you've already hinted at some of them, like food security. But what are some of the other major consequences?
The impacts are far-reaching and, frankly, pretty alarming. We're talking about everything from increased sand and dust storms.
Which I imagine are terrible for your lungs.
They absolutely are. Those dust storms are linked to respiratory illnesses. And they can travel across continents, disrupting air travel and impacting regions far from the source.
So something happening in the Sahara Desert could affect air quality here. That's crazy.
It is. And that's just one piece of the puzzle. The report also highlights the link between aridity and biodiversity loss.
Right, because if an area becomes drier, plants and animals that need more moisture can't survive.
Exactly. Over half of all vertebrate species could lose their habitats due to increasing aridity. It's a massive ecological threat.
It's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another. And it all circles back to this underlying problem of increasing aridity.
Precisely. And we haven't even talked about the social and economic impacts.
I can imagine. Water scarcity alone would lead to all sorts of conflicts, right?
Absolutely. Competition for water resources can lead to tensions between communities and even nations. And then there's the issue of migration. When people can no longer survive in their homelands due to drought, lack of food, or economic hardship, they're forced to move.
And that migration can lead to even more instability, both in the regions people are leaving and in the places they're going to.
You're right. It's a complex web of interconnected problems, all stemming from this one underlying issue of a drier planet.
Okay, I'm officially starting to feel overwhelmed here. It feels like we're facing this massive interconnected problem, and I'm just one person. What can I possibly do about any of this?
Don't worry, we're not going to leave you hanging with a sense of doom and gloom. This UN report isn't just about outlining the problems, it's also about exploring solutions.
Okay, good. Because honestly, right now, I'm feeling a lot more thirsty for solutions than I am for that glass of water I was joking about earlier.
I hear you. And what's fascinating is that many of the solutions being explored could actually have a positive ripple effect on other global challenges.
Like if we find ways to combat desertification, it might also help with climate change.
Exactly. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of the most promising solutions and see how they can make a difference, not just for the planet, but for your life as well.
All right, I'm ready to hear about these solutions. We just spent the last part of our deep dive talking about how aridity is impacting everything from food prices to dust storms. And frankly, it's a little alarming.
It's understandable to feel that way, but there's good news. This UN report doesn't just outline the problems, it also explores solutions, many of which could have positive ripple effects on other global challenges.
Okay, I like ripple effects, especially positive ones. So where do we start? How do we tackle something as massive as global aridity?
It might seem daunting, but there are several promising approaches. Remember land degradation neutrality, or LDN, that we touched on earlier?
Yeah, the idea of halting the damage and restoring what we can. But how does that actually work in practice? It still seems like a pretty big concept to wrap my head around.
It's all about adopting a holistic approach to land management, which means we're looking at the big picture. Think sustainable agriculture things like using drought-resistant crops, planting trees to improve soil health, and carefully managing livestock grazing.
So it's not just about one magic solution, but about a whole bunch of different strategies working together.
Exactly. And what's even more exciting is that some of these strategies are already showing real promise. For example, there's a technique called farmer-managed natural regeneration that's been incredibly successful in Niger.
I remember you mentioning that before. It sounds like a really interesting approach.
It is. Farmers in Niger noticed that native trees were naturally growing back on their land. They realized these trees actually helped improve the soil, provided shade for their crops, and reduced erosion, all things that make the land more resilient to aridity.
So they basically worked with nature instead of against it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They adapted their farming practices to help those trees thrive, and the results have been amazing. Millions of hectares of land have been restored, crop yields have increased, and communities are better able to withstand drought.
It's amazing how simple, yet effective, some of these solutions can be. It gives me hope that we can make a difference. Are there any other examples like this?
Absolutely. Another large-scale project is the Great Green Wall Initiative in Africa. The goal is to create a band of restored land across the entire width of Africa, from Senegal to Djibouti.
Wow, a green wall across a continent. That's ambitious. What are they hoping to achieve with that?
The main goal is to combat desertification and land degradation in the Sahel region, which is incredibly vulnerable to climate change. By restoring the land, they hope to improve food security, create jobs, and even promote peace and stability in the region.
It sounds like it's addressing a lot more than just the environmental side of things.
It is. The project is still ongoing, but they've already planted millions of trees, and communities are starting to see the benefits.
That's encouraging. It shows that even massive challenges like desertification can be tackled with coordinated effort. But earlier, you also mentioned the importance of water management, especially as water becomes scarcer. What are some of the water-saving solutions being explored?
One technique that's gaining traction is rainwater harvesting. It's a simple concept, really, collecting and storing rainwater for later use. This can involve something as basic as setting up rain barrels at your home, or as complex as building large reservoirs for irrigation.
So it's about making the most of what we already have, instead of always relying on groundwater, which we know is getting depleted in many places.
Exactly. Rainwater harvesting can help replenish groundwater, improve soil moisture, and even increase crop yields.
I can see how that would be incredibly helpful in areas prone to drought. Is there anything else being done on the water management front?
Another exciting technique is gray water recycling.
Gray water, that's the water from our sinks and showers, right?
You got it. Instead of sending that water down the drain, we can treat it and reuse it for things like watering our gardens or flushing toilets.
It seems like that could make a big difference, especially in cities where water demand is so high.
It absolutely can. In some water-stressed countries like Israel, gray water recycling is already mandatory in new buildings.
That makes so much sense. It's like giving water a second life before it goes back into the system. Are there any downsides to this approach?
Well, one challenge is that people are sometimes hesitant to reuse water. There can be concerns about safety, even though the water is treated. And then there's the initial cost of setting up a gray water system.
So it's partly about changing people's mindsets. And making sure everyone understands the benefits and the safety aspects.
Exactly. Education and awareness are key. And when it comes to cost, governments can help by offering incentives or subsidies for people who want to implement these types of water-saving solutions.
It's encouraging to know that these kinds of solutions are already being implemented in some places. But I'm also curious about what's happening on a more individual level. What can people like me do to make a difference in this fight against aridity?
That's a great question. And it's something that the UN report addresses as well. While large-scale solutions are important, individual actions can have a huge impact too.
It's easy to feel like individual actions are just a drop in the bucket when we're talking about global issues. But I'm guessing those drops can add up to something pretty significant, right?
You're absolutely right. Think of it like this. If millions of people start conserving water, choosing sustainably produced food, and supporting organizations working on these issues, it creates a powerful ripple effect.
So, what are some concrete steps that listeners can take? Where should we even begin?
Well, awareness is always the first step. You're already doing that by listening to this deep dive, so kudos to you. But you could also dig deeper into specific aspects of aridity that resonate with you. Maybe you're passionate about food security or protecting endangered species.
Right. Finding that personal connection can make a big difference in terms of motivation.
Exactly. And then think about how you can translate that awareness into action. It might be making changes in your own lifestyle, like being more mindful of your water use, or choosing products that are produced sustainably.
So practical things like taking shorter showers, fixing leaky faucets, maybe even planting drought-tolerant plants in my garden.
All great ideas. And your food choices can have a big impact too. Look for food labels that indicate sustainable farming practices, support local farmers, and maybe even try reducing your meat consumption.
I've been hearing a lot about the environmental impact of meat production lately, so that makes a lot of sense. But what about taking action beyond my own home? Are there ways to get involved in the bigger picture?
Absolutely. You can support organizations that are working on land restoration, sustainable agriculture, or water management. Many of them rely on donations and volunteers. So you can contribute your time, your money, or both.
Right, putting my money where my mouth is, or my time where my hands are. And you mentioned earlier that political action is important too.
It is. Don't underestimate the power of your voice. Contact your elected officials, advocate for policies that support sustainable solutions, talk to your friends and family about the issue, raise awareness, and get those conversations going.
It's amazing how these individual actions can ripple outward. If enough people start making noise and demanding change, it can really put pressure on those in power to do the right thing.
That's the power of collective action. Every conversation, every choice we make contributes to the overall effort.
It's like we're all part of this interconnected web. And even the smallest tug on one thread can create a ripple throughout the whole system.
Exactly. And those ripples can eventually lead to a wave of change.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of information and insights. We've explored the science, the impacts, the challenges, and the solutions to rising aridity. And I have to say, I'm walking away with a renewed sense of hope and purpose.
That's wonderful to hear. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of global challenges like climate change. But remember that each of us has the power to make a difference.
It's about finding those small actions in our everyday lives that align with our values and contribute to a better future.
Exactly.
Okay, everyone, that's a wrap on our deep dive into aridity. We hope you found this conversation as informative and inspiring as we did.
Before we sign off, we'd love to hear from you. What resonated with you the most during this deep dive? What's one action you're inspired to take? Share your thoughts on our social media channels. We can't wait to hear from you.
And remember, even in the face of a seemingly dry topic, there's always a wellspring of knowledge and possibility waiting to be explored. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.